My name is Shaheen Nanji, and I'm the Executive Director for SFU International at Simon Fraser University. And I invite you to join me to talk about mobilizing the Sustainable Development Goals in higher education international offices as I sip on my cup of Kenyan tea, my favorite tea from the land in which I was born and raised. Today, I find myself living and working on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I try to remind myself to draw on continue learning from Indigenous knowledge as I lead the SDG work at SFU, so that we can decolonize our concepts and our approaches in striving for a sustainable future for all. As an example, I tend to think about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals with their many indicators not as individual goals and metrics, but as slats in a lattice that will create a structure that supports and integrates all the disparate pieces. I also draw on Indigenous principles to help us develop the values and principles of partnership to achieving the SDGs. BCCIE has hosted a couple of sessions on the SDGs, and this one is meant to build on those. Mark Reed did a morning coffee at the end of last year where he talked about the basics of the SDGs. And my conversation with Laurel Patterson, head of the SDG Integration Unit at UNDP last fall, was a conversation about the high-level philosophy, the individual responsibility, and the possibilities for SDGs in higher education. Today, I'd like to share with you the roadmap that we've used to advance our SDG plan for global engagement at SFU. Before getting to the how, the first thing to answer is the why you as an institution should be doing this work on the SDGs. For SFU, we have 5 core reasons. The first is in the age of global crises around climate, health, equity, and polarization, it is the responsibility of higher education institutions to engage on these issues, to teach, to research, and disseminate knowledge, to engage with and convene various sectors and disciplines, and to improve our operations and policies. Secondly, for SFU, working on the SDGs resonates with our vision to be Canada's community-engaged university and our commitments to sustainability, equity, and reconciliation. The third is, as an international office, the SDGs give us a globally designed framework on which to build. Fourthly, they give us shared language for our partnerships, and finally, shared goals for our actions. Our journey doing this work began about 18 months ago when we developed a concept note to make the case for the SDGs as a framework for our global engagement strategy at SFU. We took the SDGs and translated them for our context in order to get our executive support to move ahead. We then conducted an institutional scan to take a look at where the university was already delivering and where we had the potential to deliver on the SDGs in 4 key areas. The first, teaching. What courses and opportunities for learning do we offer to credit and non-credit students? The second area is research and knowledge mobilization. How do we develop and share knowledge on the SDGs? So we looked at the publications and partnerships for research. The third area is cross-sectoral and community-centered engagement, how we connect beyond our core academic mission and how we create spaces for collaboration and public engagement. And finally, operations and policies and practices. This is about how we run the institution, and here we benchmarked our policies and operations against the goals. From this information, we have turned our attention now to the how. We've built a framework that is an adaptation of the UN's 5 Ps model, which groups the goals into people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. We added to this model the values by which we will do this work and the levers that we as an institution have at our disposal. A note here that we have adapted the model to be what we are calling an Sdg Plus approach, so that we can go deeper on issues like equity and decolonization that have a particular focus for SFU and for Canada. We're in the middle of consulting various stakeholders on the model, and once that is done, we'll use the SDG framework as the foundation of our institutional global engagement plan. So if I were to share some steps on how to go about this, I would think about this in 4 stages. The first is design. Translate the SDGs for your context and your institution so it resonates. Work at all levels, making progress on the SDGs. Start with the individual, but systems and structures matter. The second area is the development of your plan. Make it clear, coherent, and compelling. Appeal to the needs for your stakeholders, and include equity and decolonization at the very beginning. The third area is delivery. Pick priorities. You can't do it all, and take an integrated approach. Think about challenge areas rather than specific SDGs in which you can invest, foster innovation, and develop partnerships. And finally, iterate and improve. Measure the impact of what you do, communicate your successes and your areas of learning, and then iterate and do it again. So I would leave you with one thought. We're more than halfway to the 2030 deadline for the SDGs. When the SDGs were launched in 2015, climate was an important issue, but we hadn't got to speaking or thinking about it as a crisis. Pandemics were a thing of fiction for most people, and equity was a vague concept that fluttered in and out of focus for institutions. We are all in this together. Scarcity and inequity lead to fear and polarization, and inevitably the most vulnerable get left behind. I think the past few years have shown us that this is a shared risk, and as an institution of higher learning, there is no greater cause than preparing future generations to build a better world. The SDGs give us a framework to do this, so let's get to work.